Z Sports Big Orange Podcast. I am Charlie Burris, here as always with my co-host, A to Z Sports writer Zach Ragan, wherever you listen throughout the world. And thank you so much for listening to us. Zach and I talk everything Vols every week here on the Big Orange Podcast. If you want to listen to that regularly, go over to the A to Z Sports Podcast Network feed on Apple, Spotify, and subscribe there. If you do subscribe, you won't miss any of the episodes when we drop them on Mondays, and you'll get the rest of the A to Z lineup if you like the Titans or you like the Predators or anything like that. A to Z Sports Podcast Network feed, and then go over to YouTube and subscribe there to A to Z Sports. Just type in A to Z Sports on YouTube. It'll be the first thing that comes up, and you'll be able to see Zach and I's beautiful faces. What a joy that is. At Charlie_Burris, at Zach TNT, at A to Z Sports, Facebook.com/A to Z Sports Nashville, and A to Z Sports.com for all of the stuff that Zach and I write on the internet, say on the internet, all of the nonsense we do over there. Zach, a week of practice is down. The team over on, is it still? I think it is still Haslam Field, Anderson Training Center over there, whatever it might be. Everything is named after the Haslams over there, let's be honest. They hit the practice field in pads for the first time over the weekend. Big day. All the signs that football is drawing ever closer. I was looking today on the app for our amazing new sponsor, Superbook Sports, and I was looking at their bets for college football. And dude, August 27th, we are 19 days away. That is the first official, the real deal game. And some of the teams, like there is actually an SEC game. Vandy is playing at Hawaii that week. So we'll get to watch that game, but more about Superbook in a second, and college football being oh so close. Let's just get into it. Zach, what's up, man?
Not a whole lot. I can't imagine a better start to the week. Football in the air, training camps in full swing. Like you said, less than a month away. And my Mets took 4 out of 5 from the Atlanta Braves this weekend. So feeling quite good about that after having to watch a lot of Braves fans talk trash. And actually had a few back and forth, something we've talked about before on this show. And it's still something that irks me and kind of comes up every now and then. The amount of Tennessee fans that cheer for a team from Georgia with so many Georgia connections. The Braves play-by-play guy, he's a Georgia alum. He's also extremely dramatic. And, I saw a lot of Braves fans talking about the Mets acting like they won Game 7 of the World Series, winning that series. Well, every time the Braves hit a fly ball in this series, I thought it was a 500-foot home run. It'd be a short pop-up to center field. So it's
coming in talking that trash right off the top. That's good. We shaved off the less loyal listeners there. The people who are only here for our.
See, I don't tweet a whole bunch about the Mets because I know that most of my followers are Braves fans, and I get it. I totally get it. That's the closest team. I probably should have been a Braves fan. It just the way my family history and things worked out. It just didn't turn out that way. So I do understand it, but it is fun going back and forth. And listen, the Mets are very much like Tennessee football. They've found so many ways to screw it up, from ownership to just bad coaching hires, bad decisions. The parallels between them really are remarkable. So maybe more Tennessee fans should be Mets fans because they do kind of follow the same path.
Well, there you go. There's Zach's pitch to come be a Mets fan. I myself, I'm just a Texas Rangers fan, and frankly, let's just not even talk about what's happening with them because it's not worth your time. But on today's show, we're going to talk about Tennessee's running backs room first. Lyn-J Dixon, the transfer from Clemson, has become official. Then Rodney Garner, the defensive line coach, talked at practice today, being Monday. He talked, and we're going to kind of give a preview of the defensive line off of the things that he said and what he's seeing with the defensive line. And then we're going to wrap up the show a little talk about all of these horrific top 5 quarterbacks in the SEC list that people keep dropping. They're so bad. It's like these people that talk about SEC football don't watch SEC football, where we're going to talk about all of it. But first, before we get into that stuff, we got to talk about our amazing sponsor. We got to pay the bills. Superbook Sports. They are here supporting the boys. Football is back, and nobody is more excited than our friends at Superbook Sports. Superbook is bringing Vegas-style wagering to the palm of your hand, and now they will match 100% of your first bet up to $1,000, no matter if the bet wins or loses. Up to $1,000. It doesn't matter if you win or lose. They're going to match that. You don't have to be in Nashville or Knoxville to enjoy football this fall. Visit superbook.com or download the Superbook Tennessee app right now and start getting in on all the action. Visit superbook.com for terms and conditions. If you have a gambling problem, call 1-800-889-9789. Thanks to Superbook. And I was looking at the Superbook app, actually, Zach, and I'll ask you this off the top because we can relate them to Tennessee. I was looking at it, and here's what they have listed for Tennessee. And if you're looking at YouTube, you can actually see this is what the app looks like on Superbook. It's great. Great interface that they have to find games and search up the bets that you want to make. But this is the listing for Tennessee Ball State. Obviously, Tennessee's opening game on September 1st, I think. Mm-hmm. Tennessee, 32-point favorite. Obviously, they think that Tennessee is going to win. But what I wanted to ask you about here is that over-under 68. It's pretty steep. But Tennessee definitely crossed that multiple times last season. I think a decent amount with over-under depends on how long Hendon Hooker maybe stays in the game. Although if Milton is improved, hey, he can get the job done too. He won Tennessee its first football game last year. Mm-hmm. Are we hitting the over or the under? Which side of that would you be taking? It's at minus 110 odds on both sides. Where would you go?
I mean, I don't think that you can bet the under in any Tennessee game this year based on what we saw last year. I just don't think that would be a wise decision. I mean, you bring up a good point there. Like, how long do they keep the starters in? What does Joe Milton do? How does he look if he comes in? Because look, I mean, if you're a Tennessee fan, you would love to see Joe Milton in the end of that game. You'd love to see. It probably won't happen, but even Taven Jackson, if he can get some action at some point this year, that would mean that you're up by a significant amount of points. But I don't know. Tennessee's defense, they give, because of the offense, the defense gives the opposition a lot of opportunities to score points, like we've talked about. So Ball State, even though they're nowhere close to Tennessee's level, they could put up some points, not a significant amount of points, anything like that, but they could put up more points than you expect just because they get more chances. So, yeah, I think I'd roll with the over in this one.
So in the snoozer games last year, Tennessee beat Bowling Green 38-6, not even close to that over-under. Tennessee Tech 56-0. Of course, that's a FCS team. So they struggled to do anything on offense against Tennessee. And then South Alabama, they put up a couple of touchdowns on the board, but Tennessee scored 60 points in that game. That was the one out of the snoozers where Tennessee crossed over this over-under. There were 74 points in that game, 60-14 against South Alabama. I think I would take the over.
Do we know what the over-under was in that Bowling Green?
I'm looking at Tennessee's official website, so they didn't list anything like that. Yeah,
see, you bring up a good point there, though. They put up all those points against South Alabama. They probably would have put up that same amount of points or somewhere close to that against Bowling Green if Hendon Hooker starts that game. If you recall that the offense, look, Tennessee won that game 38-6, but it felt much closer. Not that Tennessee was ever in danger of losing, but the offense felt a bit sluggish with Joe Milton there. So I think that kind of probably would have turned out a little different depending on exactly what the over-under was.
Well, hopefully in this game, the offense is even more streamlined than it was last year. And that's what we're going to talk about for the bulk of today's episode. Let's start out. Practice continues on. We got a whole week under our belts at this point. Pads are actually on. We've moved past the shells onto actual pads now. And there's been plenty of kind of just notes of this guy is sitting out. He looks this way. This coach did that. That's also time sensitive and it changes day to day. That if you can get into that, there are plenty of services that cover that stuff day to day. Go check them out. You all know who they are. and they'll give you a practice report. But we just kind of want to take more of a 1,000-foot view, but specifically a 1,000-foot view first at the running backs room, because they kind of had the most exciting addition of this fall camp. Lyn-J Dixon, transfer from Clemson, a speedy back that is coming in to essentially replace Lyneth Whitehead. Although they play a pretty different style of football between the two of them. But Lyn-J Dixon is officially in with Tennessee. He committed. He was on the practice field the day after he committed. It was super quick. And now Tennessee's running back room is, I would say, there's no superstar, but a little stacked, right? It looks pretty good with the addition of Lyn-J Dixon in terms of what you want to see out of Josh Heupel's breakneck offense. I like the way this stacks up, but what did you think about this addition?
I think I kind of mentioned this when we talked about Whitehead going down for the year, and the Dixon news was kind of out there at the same time. It kind of feels like an upgrade, because Whitehead, yeah, he was kind of like in between being a linebacker or running back. They decided to put him at running back. Can't really stay healthy. Can he hold up to that contact that you take as an SEC running back? The answer is probably no. Even if he wouldn't have got injured, I just don't know how productive he would have been for Tennessee. And you replace him with a guy that, okay, things didn't really go his way at Clemson, but he averaged 6-7 yards a carry at times. Obviously has a lot of talent, former 4-star recruit. So I think it's a huge addition. I don't know if he's going to be, Tyon Evans, Eric Gray type guy that comes in and just blows everybody away from day one, but I think the potential's there. And he's not going to be the starter either. Obviously, Jabari Small's the guy. Jalen Wright, kind of more of a speed guy. And then you got Justin Williams-Thomas, the promising freshman who hasn't really looked great in practice as far as catching the ball, which is a big part of this offense. You got to be able to catch the ball out of the backfield. He's admitted that he struggled with that some, but he's working hard to get past it too. I mean, he's a true freshman. It's not going to happen overnight for him. I think we forget sometimes that when these players arrive to Tennessee as a freshman, they're not the same player they're going to be as a junior or a senior. You've got to have that development process, which this staff might be the best staff that we've seen in 10 years when it comes to developing players. It's very early, of course, but based on what we saw last year, I don't think how you can say otherwise when you look at the development of Hendon Hooker, Cedric Tillman, Velus Jones, and then Jabari Small, who kind of had to step up once Tyon Evans left. And he kind of became the guy and somebody that Tennessee could count on. So, yeah, it does feel like a strength of the team at this point.
Yeah, it really does. Dixon, the main thing that I've seen said about him is he's just small. He is really, looking at the numbers here, he's essentially the smallest guy in that room. Dylan Sampson, according to the chart here, is an inch taller but weighs a little bit less. But Sampson is a freshman, where Lyn-J Dixon is in his 4th year of college, technically, I think, at this point. It even says he's a redshirt senior, so maybe 5th year of at least being around college football. He was a 4-star recruit in 2018. So yeah, 2018 was 4 years ago, Lordy. So he's been around a lot longer. To me, it seems like the pecking order would be this. If I had to call it right now, Jabari Small's your primary guy. Then it is Jalen Wright. I mean, he really put some nice stuff on the field at the end of the season last year. And then somewhere in between Justin Williams-Thomas and Lyn-J Dixon, I think I would guess Lyn-J Dixon and maybe Justin Williams-Thomas becomes the short yardage guy. And then Dylan Sampson is kind of bringing up the rear. Although I have heard he's been a guy that a lot of people have been talking about, actually. Dylan Sampson, they said he's been putting in some nice reps. He's looked good on the practice field. Do it that way you will. You kind of take that with a grain of salt just because it's practice. But I could kind of see, as I mentioned, Sampson and Lyn-J Dixon are similarly sized. Maybe they split reps in that 3rd spot. I don't know. It really is. It's interesting because there are so many options there, and Josh Heupel's offense is so tailored to getting those guys the football in space. And And I think there's plenty of opportunity for all of these guys to make plays. And we're just assuming that Justin Williams-Thomas would be the short yardage guy, but he's just the biggest. But I think this room has improved over last year, and I'm excited to see what happens, even if it's undersized. I think go across the board, it's undersized at the running back position, but that almost kind of plays into Josh Heupel's super speedy offense, right? Like you want almost speed over size in this scenario, because it's not like you're trying to just jam it down the defense's throat. I like the way it sets up.
Yeah, I think one thing that'll obviously play a big factor in the depth chart is the ever exciting, just thrilling thing to talk about is pass protection. Who can pass protect. It's not something that you talk about a lot. It's not something that really shows up in highlights. But if you're a big football fan that really kind of gets behind the curtain and looks at just the way the offense operates, and you see some of these things, that's going to be a big part of it. We saw how important blocking for wide receivers was in this offense last year, and Tennessee's receivers really bought in to that. And listen, you can sell that to these players. Blocking is important, and that's what shows up on tape, and that's what NFL teams see. And of course, they're going to see the big plays and how you carry the ball, how you catch the ball, all of that. But if you can't block, it's going to be really hard to latch on with an NFL team. So I think that's probably something that they've stressed to these players, and that's why they were so good at it last year. But that's going to play a big factor in it, obviously. Heupel's talked a lot about correcting the things that went wrong last year. And I know this is something you've pointed out many times is that third and short situations where instead of just picking up those 2-3 tough yards behind an offensive line and a big running back, they're trying to throw the ball down the field and catch the defense off guard. And that's still part of their strategy, but that's just not, it's not a good way to approach the SEC. You have to be able to pick up 2-3 yards by running the ball on third and short. Like, you have to be able to do that to win in the SEC. It's imperative. So I think that's going to be a big emphasis in this offense this year at times. So maybe that helps Justin Williams-Thomas get on the field earlier, even if he does have some deficiencies in pass protection or catching the ball out of the backfield. He can at least serve in that role. We'll see. Maybe, who knows? Maybe Dylan Sampson shows that he can be that guy as a true freshman. You never know. I really hope that he turns out to be like a Travis Etienne type player that comes out of Louisiana that LSU kind of ignored, that goes on elsewhere to have a fantastic career. Maybe he's that guy that, diehard Tennessee fans are kind of talking about him, but there's not a lot of attention on him otherwise. Perhaps he's a breakout player for Tennessee this year.
And there's plenty of opportunity for that exact thing on this team. More on defense, just because, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. it's a little thin on that side of the ball. But even on offense, where you do have a more set roster, I think, at this point, but you're still going to have plenty of opportunity because of the amount of plays that are run by this offense in a typical game. You're going to do a lot of rotating, and we saw a lot of different running backs last year. Well, not a lot of different running backs, but just different running backs on different plays because of needing to rotate, needing to give guys a breather. And the main thing that I do hope, to a little bit of your point there, is that something that improves in a big way, given another year to practice what Heupel does, is the right word, like the pacing, I guess, and the flow and the feel of what Heupel does, because I feel like that's such a huge component of this that really was so noticeable between a Joe Milton to a Hendon Hooker, was that Hooker just got the feel. He got just that, whatever it is, that aura of Heupel's offense much more. He felt it so much better than Milton ever did. And I mean, everybody, to make that offense work, everybody has to get into that feel, including the running backs, and in a big way, like you said, the blocking for some of these screen passes, and just the pass blocking in general has to be really good and on time and in the right place, or else that offense is not going to be able to work. And And hopefully that stuff takes a step forward. I mean, just the problem is that 3 out of the 5 guys in that room are brand new. And so, I think you can trust Jabari Small. Jalen Wright's been in it. But what are you going to see out of like a Lyn-J Dixon who's showing up literally 2 days ago and kind of jumping into this offense? I mean, is he going to be used to it enough to be useful in like the early part of the season? I don't know, because it is such a unique offense. So we'll have to see exactly where it all goes. But I think no matter what, we're pretty confident in the setup of this room. It's a lot of talent, and there are pieces in there, as you mentioned, that could be breakout talent, and hopefully that does come to fruition, because it would just be so nice to have some surprise pieces here. Like that's something that could really make this team go from, I think right now people are kind of considering them like top 25, but probably between 20 and 25 in America. Like that's sort of how Tennessee is being perceived right now, where I think you have some special pieces that emerge on either side of the football, and you could jump up to top 15, maybe top 10. I don't know, but I think people at least see the potential in Tennessee for that. I know I do. And it's going to take the emergence of some guys that we haven't seen emerge yet, and maybe some of them will be in this running back room. I don't know.
Yeah, speaking of top 25, real quick, the preseason USA Today coaches poll, the top 25 was released just as we started recording this podcast, and Tennessee did not make the top 25. I believe I saw that they were just on the outside of the top 25. You got Ole Miss at 24, Arkansas at 23, Kentucky at 21, and then Texas A&M at 7, Georgia at 3, and Alabama, of course, at number 1. So yeah. I was going to be – I get it. I think Tennessee should be top 25, but they're close enough. I mean, I kind of understand it. As long as South Carolina wasn't in there, that would have been ridiculous. But to go back to what you were saying about the offense and picking it up, that's really one of my biggest things with this approaching this season, and what do I expect from Tennessee this season, is how big of a factor is the second year in Josh Heupel's offense. Like, players are more comfortable. They're not learning the offense anymore. They're perfecting the offense. So how big of a jump do we see this season? And I honestly don't know what to expect. I don't know if it's an incremental progress where it's just like, okay, Tennessee just needs to be faster and bigger and stronger before they really take that next step. Or do they take that next step this year because they have more experience in this offense? That's really one of the more fascinating questions to me this offseason, is what kind of jump we get this year. Obviously, you want to see progress, but how big is that progress there? How big is that jump in progress that we see?
Yeah, because it is an offense that is really tailored to pull production out of less talent.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's not like Georgia's offense where to make that thing work, you got to have 5-star running backs, 5-star wide receivers, and a decently competent quarterback. Like, that's not how Tennessee's offense is built. It is built to take, like Heupel has kind of emphasized this offseason, take a roster of, that is brutally shallow and be able to actually pull stuff out of it. And clearly it worked last season. That team really lacked depth. What do we say? 69 players at the end of the season? Like, just brutally shallow. And you still got that kind of offensive production that you got last year. So it's really tailored to that. And what happens when you inject a little more talent, a little more depth, and probably most importantly, hopefully most importantly, more experience in it, especially with a guy like Hooker, who has all of this time to have worked it out now, where he really should have his feel honed in and his vision honed in, I think, in terms of how the offense should work. I'm pretty excited to see. I don't want to get my hopes too high, because Tennessee in my lifetime has made a habit out of getting me excited and crushing my dreams. But I really do think that that it could be a nice little step forward. I've even seen the guys covering practice. I've seen them mention that the practices in general are just a little more cohesive, a little more of a sort of well-oiled machine than they were a year ago. And all of that just comes from having more time with these coaches in this system, doing what they do, getting used to the way that they operate. You didn't have a lot of turnover. Thank God you didn't have a lot of turnover with the coaches. So not much is going to be that new. And I really am. This is something I am truly excited about coming up, is just being able to see this team with a year under its belt and how that translates. I think it could really be good.
Yeah, I mean it's certainly there's a lot of hope right now. I mean, you see there's a prediction from 24/7 Sports this morning. One of their writers predicted the whole first month of the season for each SEC team, right? And he's got Tennessee going 4-0, which means they beat Florida. I mean, if you come out of that stretch and you beat Florida and you're 4-0, I mean that you're on the path to 10 wins for sure. Plus you got a win against Pittsburgh in there too. That I think a lot of people are kind of overlooking that game because Kenny Pickett's not there. But look, that game's at Pittsburgh. It's going to be a tough game. That's still a really good team. They're preseason ranked number 18, I believe, in that coaches poll that was just released. You come out of that stretch 4-0, and it's going to feel just like it did in 2016 when Tennessee started 5-0 and they beat Florida and Georgia. But you come out of that stretch with a bye week, and then you go down to Baton Rouge on October 8th. Can you imagine, especially if that's a night game, how insane that atmosphere will be, especially if LSU's off to a good start under Brian Kelly? That will be, I mean, that right there, we talked about it with the Ole Miss game last year. Even though Tennessee lost that game, that environment, that is what you want. I mean, that is what Tennessee should be every single game they play, unless it's a, FCS team at a noon kickoff. Obviously, you're going to be a little more subdued, but you want these crazy, wild atmospheres where this is a marquee game. You got the best announcers on television. Everybody's watching this game, and Tennessee feels like they're destined to go back to those games. I mean, that's what it's all about to me. I mean, that's what gets me excited, thinking about the loudness of what Tiger Stadium will be like in Tennessee, maybe going in there and knocking them off to go to 5-0. Does it get any better than thinking about that?
It would be so good to be back in that echelon, because you had it for like 2 seconds with Butch.
Yes.
You beat Florida, you beat Georgia, and then that Texas A&M game after you were undefeated, it was massive. I think
that was a hard, tough game to watch because it felt like they found that magic. Who was it that ran down the interception and knocked it out of the goal line, and then I believe Kamara scored after that or something, and that game went in overtime, didn't it? I believe.
Yeah.
So I mean, I believed in that moment when they made that comeback. I believed they were going to win that game, and I think you're right. That was the first game after, because then Alabama was the week after that, and that was a disaster.
It was top 10 matchup.
Yeah.
I think we were like number 9, they were like number 7 or something.
Yeah.
Texas A&M was at Texas A&M, sold out game. I believe it was CBS game of the week.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, you had that chase down, fumble through the end zone, and when that had, because I think Tennessee had gotten down by like 14 points.
Yeah, which they had done against Georgia. I don't know if it was quite, but they were down by quite a bit at halftime of that game, and they were down to Florida, 21 to
21.
Yeah, so I mean, it felt like, okay, this is they're going to do it again. Like after watching them do it twice in the same month, same couple of weeks, I 100% believe they were winning that game. So me as a sports fan, a little peek into my psyche, I tend to try to convince myself that something bad's going to happen. That way, when it does happen, I'm not that upset. I do it every night watching the Mets. I do it with Tennessee football. But that night, I did not let myself do that. I gave in and I believed, and that hurt. That game hurt. It stayed with me 6 years later.
It really felt like I said, with that fumble through the end zone, you just felt like, all right, this is destiny right here. Mm-hmm. It felt like along the lines of the Sterner stumble and fumble, where you were just like, what? Mm-hmm. No, like this stuff can't happen. This isn't the kind of bounces Tennessee gets. And ultimately they lost the game. But, like I said,
it was still an incredible effort though by those players on that field that night. And they did that in spite, they did won those 5 games, all of that in spite of Butch Jones.
And you were coming off the Hail Mary. I mean, it already felt miraculous. Mm-hmm. just to be there. And even you didn't even have a chance at that Hail Mary without Derek Barnett getting a sack fumble. And Tennessee recovering. I mean, Corey Vereen recovered it in the end zone for a Tennessee touchdown. Like, it was just stuff where you were like, this is team of destiny kind of stuff. Like, but ultimately, I think what it actually was is that Tennessee should have beaten Georgia and Florida by like 14, 21 points each. And instead, because Butch isn't a very good coach, you had to beat Georgia on a Hail Mary. I think you were considerably better than both of those teams talent-wise, and Butch didn't know what to do. Is ultimately what that actually was, more than team of destiny moments. But I think with Heupel's team, what you could see this year, and this almost scares me more than the whole come from behind thing like Butch was always doing. It would be, I think Heupel's team is perfectly built to get ahead in a game. Like, you could have one where Georgia stalls out on his first couple of drives and Tennessee is suddenly up 14-0. And you go, oh, okay, this is real. Like, you're in a position where you're up 2 scores on Georgia or whoever.
Well, that's like the Alabama game last year, right? I mean, didn't they get up fairly decent in that game? And
like, I think this team just really has the potential to get in a situation like that. And what we saw last year is, can they hang on? It's pretty tenuous just because Heupel's offense gives the other team so many opportunities.
they about got to play perfect and just they cannot miss like one of those deep throws to beat Georgia.
You have to.
Like, they're gonna score on you. They're just going to, obviously, because like you said, they give so many chances. But you cannot overthrow a wide open Cedric Tillman down the field. Like, when he's got the defender by 5 steps, you have to hit that. Like, the game's gonna hinge on it. You might not get that chance again. That's tough to play perfect. But I mean, it's Georgia. I mean, that's the defending champions. It's no slight against Tennessee. It just is what it is.
But when you look back at those games where you get the great upsets, Johnny Manziel against Alabama, Texas A&M last year against Alabama. You look at those, and in those moments, the play was made. There is so seldom those where you have those missed opportunities and Alabama still gets knocked off. Everything has to come together. And there's just with the breakneck speed of what Heupel does, there's so many opportunities for things to go wrong. And that just, it scares me. It really, really scares me. It gives me the hope. Like I said, I think there's a chance for something like, oh, you get a quick lead on Alabama, you get a quick lead on Georgia or something. And how do you go from there? I think you will be better than Florida. You will be better than Pittsburgh. It is the actual coming through and beating them. Can Tennessee go 4-0, especially with this offense like we've been talking about? Absolutely. Will they? It makes me nervous to even say that. Obviously, the week before the season starts, we're going to give our full season prediction. But I'll
say this:
it's absolutely possible. I don't know.
Before we move on to the next topic, I will say this: I hope, because I keep thinking about 4-0, and my first instinct is, okay, if you beat Pittsburgh, you feel really confident you're going to go beat Florida at home.
Yeah.
But I really hope that this team doesn't have the same mentality as the fan base, where there's just this block. Like you've said, it's Florida. And until Tennessee beats Florida, you have to pick Florida in that game. And I don't know if we will or not whenever that time comes, but I feel like that's what's prevented Tennessee from coming through in some of these games, is there's so much pressure, and you get up on Florida. We've seen it so many times in 2012 and 2014, 2015, 2017, just so many different times that they should have beat Florida, and it just falls apart towards the end. And it really feels like it's because it's Florida. It's because that uniform's on. Like, if that was a different team, Tennessee wins those games. I hope this team is so far removed from that mentality that doesn't factor into that game, because that's the only thing that I see being a hiccup against Florida in September, especially since that game's early in the season and Florida's still going to be kind of finding their way under Billy Napier.
It's the comparison that I always go back to, but Tennessee basketball with Kentucky. You can blast through that mental block. You beat with Barnes, you beat Kentucky and Rupp that one time, and you've done it three times since then, 2 times since then, and you beat Kentucky more than you lose to them. You can flip that script. It is possible, but it is exactly that. How do you get past that mental block? You have to. It is really seeing it to believe it. Beat them this year and beat them next year in the swamp. Like, I think it's going to take that really to finally blast through it and get back to where you're trading games with Florida and it's much more of a rivalry and you're maybe beating them more than you're losing to them. It's going to take just finally getting through that mental block. My faith is low, admittedly, as far as that goes, but my hope is high. If I can put it that way. But let's talk briefly about something that I think, in terms of going 4-0 to open the season, something that could be a hindrance to that, and that is the defensive line for Tennessee. Rodney Garner, defensive line coach for Tennessee, gave a press conference today, sort of recapping practice so far for his unit. And just listening to what he said and looking at the setup of the defensive line, I think you have really nice pieces on the edges, and everything besides that is pretty dicey. And so let's sort of break down what some of the stuff that he said. So he praised, as I mentioned on the edges, he praised Tyler Barron, said that he's gotten a lot better. He's become more, quote, coachable this season. And he said, I loved this quote. We talked about this before we came on here, Zach. He said, "No one came to Tennessee wanting to go 7-6. That is not the standard here." I love that. That sounds awesome. Nobody did come here to go 7-6. It's all about winning the SEC, winning a national championship. He said Latrell Bumpus is one of the greatest young men I've ever had the honor to coach. He's a real dude. He's a man's man. He only started going full speed a week ago before camp started. And he's gone out there and done some great things on film. So that's encouraging. You had some talks like that. And then the main thing that I think scares both of us was this quote right here. Somebody asked him about replacing Matthew Butler on the interior, who he's 5th round pick in the draft this year, and Tennessee has to replace that production. He said, "That's been a big void for us. We took Matt for granted and how valuable he was. I don't know that we've filled that role yet. So we have to keep pushing those guys to see who rises to the top." I don't like the sound of that, but you are only a week into practice. So maybe that guy is still there. You heard what he said today. You've kind of seen what's been coming out of practice so far, Zach. What are your thoughts on the defensive line?
I mean, there's definitely a lot of unproven players there with talent. I do think you're going to miss Matthew Butler a ton, mostly because of his leadership. I mean, he was such a accountable person. He held people around him accountable. He was just a great leader. I mean, there's really no other way to put it. And for Rodney Garner to say that, I don't know if he's frustrated because they haven't found that leader, or maybe he's just trying to use that as motivation to have some guys step up to be that leader. I don't know. I know coaches are very measured in what they say and why they say it, especially a veteran like Rodney Garner. So I'm sure he had a reason for putting that out there, knowing that people like us would kind of dissect it and point to it as a negative. But it is something that you have to do. You have to replace Matthew Butler, and you don't have a lot of proven guys there on the defensive line outside of your edge rushers. I mean, maybe Tyree West can step up and be that guy as a freshman and kind of surprise everybody. Well, not really surprise everybody, just kind of contribute earlier than expected. But you can't really count on a freshman to do that. So that's not wise to count on him. If it happens, it's great. It's a concern. And that's an area, obviously, the trenches. You have to be good there. And that's part of Tennessee still building depth. And it's going to be tough for them to get some of these defensive linemen until recruits kind of get a better feel for this defense and what this defense is about. I thought Tim Banks did a great job last year, but we still didn't really necessarily get Tennessee's defensive identity. It didn't really just shine through like the offense did. And maybe once that happens, we'll see them starting to get more of these defensive linemen where they can compete with the Georgias and Alabamas and some of those teams that are a little beefier up front and have more experience. But that's tough. When you look at Georgia's depth chart and they got a 4-star guy on 3rd string, it's kind of frustrating. Like, what do you do? Like, how do you go against that? I mean, It puts pressure on your offensive line because they got to go against those guys, and it puts pressure on your defensive line because you expect them to play at that same level.
Yeah, even at the positions of strength on that defensive line, like the edge, after you get past Barron and Young, you kind of go, well, where do we go? You do have Roman Harrison. And
Dominic Bailey is somebody that Gardner pointed out as having a great offseason.
James Pierce was, according to some services, a 5-star coming in, and there's been some talk that he's going to try to get in there, get some playing time. Joshua Josephs, I think he was a 4-star.
It's just unproven. It's a lot of unproven.
Exactly. That's true across this entire line. Because I mean, you're on the interior, your top returning guy production wise is Amari Thomas, and he just wasn't that huge of a factor last year. He had moments where you went like, oh hey, that looks good, but even your top returning guy at that spot is pretty unproven, and that's a little daunting. I mean, and Elijah Simmons, who's been here for a long time, I mean, what did he play in, like 3-4 games last year? Just hasn't panned out. I don't even, was he injured? I don't know, but like Karak Garland, somebody like that, where you saw little flashes, but what do you actually expect out of that unit? I'm not sure, and I don't think that Gardner knows either. And it's not his fault. He can only see what's been on the practice field. And I just think as a coach, that's got to be kind of scary, man, where you just go like, well, our best guy left and don't really know who's going to take his spot. The guy that had the most production last year really wasn't that great, so maybe he can be that, but we don't totally know. I don't know. I don't want to like fearmonger or anything like that. The defensive line is not going to be the linchpin of this team, but you can definitely say this: a great defensive line could be the difference for this team, just because it could get you, extra stops equals extra opportunities for Tennessee's offense to lay more points on that team, and that's the way the Josh Heupel system works. I mean, it's complementary football. And the more stops you get, the more points you can put up on a team, get a bigger lead, blah, blah, blah. We all know.
Well, the good news, though, is that Rodney Gardner is one of the best defensive line coaches in college football.
Yeah.
So maybe he can get these guys playing, a little above their talent level. And I kind of view him as like the Sam Pittman of defensive line coaches. So that's, maybe that helps level the field a little bit, but the lack of depth is still concerning because when it comes to injuries happening, you can't prevent those, and you can't coach around injuries, but so much. You can only play the players that you have. And if you lose some of those guys and you got to go down to your second, third, fourth options, well, suddenly you've got a borderline 3-star guy lining up against a massive right guard at Georgia, or even some of these other programs that have recruited well, like Kentucky's got, maybe they're not the same Kentucky as they have been. Tennessee still handles them, but it's a lot bigger challenge, and you don't want your 4th-string defensive line going against their 1st-string offense. So it is concerning. I don't think it's like going to be it's not the end of the season for Tennessee. We're not trying to say anything like that, but I mean, look, there's positives and there's things that are concerns. It's a young program, and this is one of the bigger concerns.
Well, kind of to your point about Garner, he's one of the best defensive line coaches in America. That's amazing. And I think what you have to hope for, sort of what we were talking about with the running back room, is that you find surprise production. You just get it out of like an Amari Thomas. Can you take the flashes that he showed and make him the guy? Bring him up to that Matthew Butler level. And I hope that Garner and what he is saying is going out and using it as motivation over him actually saying, oh, we haven't found that guy yet. Hopefully he is using it to look at some of those guys and go, hey, this needs to be you. I'm not going to crown you, but you need to be that guy. Let's step it up. Let's keep going, keep pushing. Hopefully he's using those types of comments. He's using them that way over him actually going, I don't know where we're going to go for the defensive line. And I think that is probably what he's doing because he is just a really, really solid coach. But it's it is just a unit where if they have a great year, it will be a surprise. I think you could put it that way, except at the edges. I think you should expect. I think we said this a couple weeks ago. If you doubled the production, which would be a lot to ask, but I think would be possible. If you doubled the production of Barron and Young on the edges, that's a serious pass rush. You would be in the top half of the SEC for sure with that type of production out of those guys. And I think it's possible. Is it likely? I'm not sure. How much of a step forward are they going to take? So far the signs have been good in practice. As I said, Garner even mentioned Barron has become better and more coachable. He pointed that out in the press conference today. So yeah, maybe you get step forwards out of those guys and just force more sacks and more hurries and get quarterbacks kind of feeling footsteps, and that can change the entire dynamic of the whole thing. And maybe there is a surprise guy in there that we're discounting, or one of the freshmen really steps up or something like that. It would be huge, but that is just a fact of life for this defensive line. Outside of those pieces that we have seen give nice production so far, and there's only a couple, it is a crapshoot, and it could be great, or I feel like it could be one of the biggest weaknesses on the team. It's going to be pretty tenuous, and we'll see. But I have faith in Garner. At least you have one of the best coaches at that position in America heading those guys up, and you can at least say that. And he kind of, between him and Banks last year, they did kind of pull a rabbit out of the hat. They were perilously thin and still made it work. And you beat Kentucky. You had some good games out of those guys. So we'll just have to see. Hopefully Garner can once again kind of have a magic season. That'd be nice.
His comments about Tyler Barron today, talking about him being more coachable and just the work he's put in, it kind of made me wonder, and I could be totally wrong on this, but, Tyler Barron briefly hit the transfer portal this offseason, quickly came back. Pretty evident that there's like an NIL deal there that swayed him to come back. We've seen him doing some NIL stuff, so we do know those deals exist. And I wonder if, this is something Josh Heupel's talked about, if the presence of these NIL deals have made players aware of, hey, if I'm producing out there on the field on Saturdays, I'm going to get more opportunities, more money coming my way. If that's kind of like a motivating factor for Barron, because it does seem like he's a completely different guy this offseason. I wonder if that factors in at all to what we're seeing from him.
Heupel's brought that up a lot, that the NIL stuff kind of changes the way that these players approach being in the football program, because it makes the consequences of their actions so much more real. If I produce on the football field, I'm going to have a bigger profile. I can get more money. And it also kind of deters, like, oh, if I go to this party and I get arrested, I'm screwed and I'm done. And so it gives the motivation on one end to play better, and it gives them motivation on the other end to not go out and be stupid. And so I love that Heupel's brought that up. I think that's a great point. I hope that becomes a motivating factor, but it's going to be, to that point, it's going to be a motivating factor across the board for every team in the SEC. Every program outside of Vandy and Mizzou have gobs of NIL money running through there. And so it's going to be true for everybody, but I hope so, because Tennessee is going to need that motivation, I think, with this defensive line. They're going to need some guys to surprise us this year. And hopefully they will. Maybe we'll see the emergence of those guys as fall camp goes along. It'd be nice to at least get a little more of an idea of where this line is going before the season starts. But we'll, if there's updates on that, we'll go from there. But before we get into this final topic, Zach, anything else about practice, defensive line, running backs, anything else that you've noticed this week you want to bring up?
No, I mean, it seems like everything's going in the right direction. We've seen some reports about some of the receivers routes and stuff not being as crisp. I wouldn't worry too much about that. It's still early during fall camp, and they're still working things out. I think we saw last year that these wide receivers will be fine. It's a talented group. They got good leadership there. Cedric Tillman. You hope that Brew McCoy can be a factor this year. He's got to get cleared, got to get in shape. I think he's kind of been working off to the side so far. Hopefully, though, he seems like a guy that works hard, and he's a physical player, great blocker, so he's definitely going to have a role in this offense. Assuming, like I said, assuming he gets in shape and the NCAA does their part and clears him and allows him to play this season. And that is a total wild card that we really have no clue what the NCAA will choose to do or when they'll choose to do it. It'll probably be at the most inopportune time, I'm sure.
It's going to be like first quarter of the bowl game. Tennessee plays and they're going like, he's cleared.
I do think he'll probably miss the Ball State game just because that's what the NCAA does, and we've seen it so many times. Like, there's no inside information on that. Haven't heard anything like that. It's just what I assume will probably happen because that's the NCAA and it's Tennessee, and that's how these things go.
The NCAA will never let it be easy.
No.
They don't do it. Never. Yeah, we shall see as far as that goes with Brew McCoy. Yeah, and you have seen kind of the reports coming out of practice that he's bringing up the rear a little bit on being in shape, and so he's got some work to do. But hopefully, hardworking kid, get after it, because I think if he can put up big numbers, obviously in Josh Heupel's offense at the wide receiver position, if you can become a prominent guy, Josh Heupel will get you paid. Josh Heupel will get you to the NFL. And so hopefully that's enough motivation for him to get there. And obviously the NCAA is a factor in that too, as dumb as that is. And we'll go from there. But
a quick side note on that, something that you said just kind of popped in my head. If Brew McCoy does come out this year and has a tremendous year, ends up being a decent draft pick, I really think you're going to start seeing Tennessee be the destination for transfer wide receivers. Maybe not the five-star guys coming out of high school, because those guys are still going to go to Alabama and Georgia and USC and some of those places. But if you get to the point where, okay, Valus transferred and played under Heupel, third-round pick, Cedric Tillman could end up being a first or second-round pick. He wasn't a transfer, but in a way, he took the same path almost as a transfer, because he played under two completely different coaches. And under Jeremy Pruitt, he was not utilized at all. He had like 6 or 7 catches his whole career before Josh Heupel arrived. So you start stacking those up. Brew McCoy ends up being the next one. I think you're going to see Tennessee kind of have their pick of the litter when it comes to transfer wide receivers.
Man, I hope so. It would be nice to corner the market on something like that again.
And Javonte Payton is another one as well.
Oh yeah, that's true. Yeah, let's get Tennessee
with the Cardinals.
Tennessee needs to become transfer wide receiver U. And we don't even need to be wide receiver U. In fact, I would almost prefer to be transfer wide receiver U.
Yeah,
because a lot of times those guys are they can give you an immediate impact over freshmen. So, with that said, let's finish with this kind of a little less serious topic. But there have just been so many terrible top 5 quarterback lists during this offseason. I have lost faith. I didn't have much, but I've lost all faith, I think, in SEC media. I mean, what are these guys watching? We talked about one a couple weeks ago from Tim Tebow, which was just clearly Tim was just working too much on his, what is he doing? His being a youth pastor? I don't know. What does Tim Tebow do? He was spending more time doing that than watching SEC football, because his list of top 5 quarterbacks was just off the map. I believe didn't have Hendon Hooker or KJ Jefferson on it. KJ Jefferson in Arkansas for the uninitiated. But the one that got me going here and made me want to bring this topic up again was Matt Stinchcomb at the SEC Network, who you would think, I mean, this guy's on the SEC Network every single day. It is, I believe, his full-time job at this point. He's not doing speeches at mega churches like Tebow. And so his list was this. Bryce Young at number 1. Okay, fine. I think that's almost everybody's number 1. Stetson Bennett at Georgia at 2. Hendon Hooker at 3. Will Levis at 4. KJ Jefferson at 5. No mention of Will Rogers at Mississippi State. And I just, obviously, the bone that I had to pick with him was Stetson Bennett at 2. I mean, folks, he won a national championship, but Stetson Bennett was not the reason Georgia won a national championship. Not even close. He was the 9th most prolific quarterback in the SEC last year in terms of yards. He didn't throw the ball as much because he was there to hand the ball off. Kirby Smart runs an offense from the early 1990s. It is just like pre-Steve Spurrier SEC football is what that guy's putting out there on the football field. Like, it is just ridiculous. And they impose their will on you. They have earth movers up front, and they push you all around the field. And they, obviously have got them a national championship. But also, they relied extremely heavily on their defense. That was a whole other part of it, too. But Stetson Bennett at 2. Guys, we all watched the guy play. What are we doing? Come on. But from this, I wanted us, because we've been hawking on the Zach, to give our top 5 quarterbacks to kind of finish here. Who do we think is the best in the SEC? Is it just going to be Bryce Young winning the Heisman again this year? Will there be a surprise? And I feel like, for whatever reason, maybe we can give a little more of a down the middle take here potentially, even though we're obviously going to be biased towards Tennessee. So, did you have any thoughts on this, Zach, before we just go to the top 5 we had?
Yeah, I don't know, the deal with Stetson Bennett. He feels like the Alabama quarterbacks we used to see before Tua kind of arrived, and Mac Jones, where these guys like Greg McElroy and Brody Croyle, like they were on good teams. Well, Brody Croyle wasn't, that was before Saban, but some of those guys, they were on good teams, but they weren't NFL quarterbacks. They were kind of game managers. They did kind of what Saban wanted them to do to pick up yards and win games. And I think it was when Lane Kiffin arrived at Alabama that Nick Saban's offensive philosophy changed a lot. They started going with a little more tempo, started seeing quarterbacks play more of a role in the offense, as Jalen Hurts and some of these guys that really excelled, and now Bryce Young. So I don't know how Stetson Bennett keeps getting lumped in there, but he definitely does not deserve to be anywhere near the top 5, in my opinion, even if that team did win a national championship.
Like, I could eat these words for sure, but the guy is not going to do anything in the pros. At best, he's like a lifelong backup, which is honestly a great career. If you
probably the best career.
Yeah, you do nothing and you get paid usually like $1 million, and it's awesome.
Like, imagine being Josh Dobbs. Just,
oh man, what a job! What a job! And he's still, like, he can come back to Knoxville and get free drinks at every bar in town.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what a life that's got to be. And Stetson Bennett at this point won a national championship for Georgia. It's going to be the same way. He will be able to go back to Athens and be a hero anytime he wants to. Yeah, maybe he could be a backup in the NFL, but the perfect comparison was those game managers for Nick Saban. He's that guy, just 9-star players all around him, on all sides, in front of him, behind him, all around, and he just hands the ball off. That's what he does, and that's the function that he serves in that offense, and that's fine. They need that guy, but he's not going to be in my top 5. For me personally, number 1, you just look at the numbers, you look at what the kid did last year, and you look at probably the long-term prospects. I think Bryce Young, as much as I hate to give Alabama that credit, and dang it, Nick Saban always finds a way, but Bryce Young is number 1 in the SEC this season. He won the Heisman. What are you going to do? He's probably going to be he's obviously the Heisman favorite going into this season yet again, even though you almost never get a repeat. But yeah, he's the number 1 guy in the SEC, right?
Yeah, but you're probably right that somebody will come out of nowhere and end up winning the Heisman this year, kind of like Joe Burrow or some of these other years where, what Joe Burrow, it was supposed to be Trevor Lawrence. Yeah, it was supposed to be Trevor Lawrence or Tua, and it ended up being Joe Burrow. So this year it's supposed to be Bryce Young. If it's not him, it's going to be Will Levis, according to the national media.
Yeah.
My reaction as well. So yeah, maybe we'll be Hendon Hooker.
So
what's your top 5? Do you have?
Well, so I think the main contention point is this number 2 spot, right? In SEC. Past the top 3-ish, it's pretty up in the air. To me, it really comes down to Hooker or Will Rogers at Mississippi State, which again, Stinchcomb had not, KJ Jefferson is good, but he's so much slower. And he's almost like could you have like a power quarterback, so to speak? Like he's the guy's just a monster. But I don't think that he is as good of a passer or manager as either of those guys. Will Rogers is certainly a product of the system that he plays in. Leach throws 10,000 times a game.
Yeah, he's Graham Harrell. He could be.
Yeah, but you look at his stats last year, he completed 74% of his passes, 36 touchdowns, 9 interceptions on 505 completions. And so I think pure quarterback, I would go Rodgers. I want to sound a little unbiased here. I would probably go Rodgers at the number 2 spot. I just think if I was talking about not in Josh Heupel's system, like if I was Georgia looking for someone to be better than Stetson Bennett and I looked at the rest of the SEC, I think I would go Will Rogers just out of the set of guys that are there. Outside of the ones that are just kind of unknowns like at LSU and Texas A&M and stuff, which you could have some guys emerge there. We're just not sure yet, but I think I'd have to go with him there.
It's really tough for me. I'm right there too with you. Rodgers, the numbers are pretty eye-popping. You see 4,700 yards, and
massive
what
numbers,
36 touchdowns, 9 interceptions, and what do you say, 74% of his passes. I mean, those are insane numbers, but we see those numbers a lot in Mike Leach's systems. And like I mentioned, Graham Harrell, who was he was a Texas Tech guy. I mean, he didn't really pan out at all in the NFL. I think he latched on with the Packers for a little bit, but he had insane numbers. But that didn't mean he was a great quarterback. So I'm torn. Is Will Rogers good, or is he like you said, a product of the system? Conversely, is Hendon Hooker good, or is he a product of his system? Yeah. I mean, he didn't do a ton at Virginia Tech. He was average at best and had some struggles there. And then he comes and it sells at Tennessee. But he took care of the football, only 3 interceptions. I think he completed a decent percentage of his passes. I think if you're being unbiased, you do have to go Will Rogers at number 2, just based on last year. If you're just looking at this, if you just look at the numbers, I mean, there's no way that you can put Hooker above Rogers. I don't feel like. That's not to say that I think he's, going to have a better pro career or has a better shot at the Heisman this year. I don't know. I mean, we got to see how it plays out, but just based on the numbers, I think you got to go Rogers. And then I would have Hooker at 3.
Agreed.
And then from there, I think it's KJ Jefferson. I'm a little higher on him than I think you are, maybe, but not. I think I agree. I think there's a decent gap between 3 and 4, though, between Hooker and Jefferson. I don't think he's like challenging Hooker for that 3 spot. I think Hooker's closer to Rodgers than he is Jefferson. And then I would have Will Levis at 5. I like Will Levis. I don't think he's a Heisman Trophy contender. He turns the ball over a little too much. And I don't watch enough Kentucky to really know how much of that's on him or how much of it's the offense, the receivers, kind of what they're trying to do there. But I watched some of him at SEC Media Days and some of his interviews. And I was really impressed with him just kind of away from the football field, having conversations with guys. He had a conversation with 3HL 104.5 The Zone. And my first thought was, this guy's going to be a color commentator when he's done with college football. And if he plays in the NFL, he's eventually going to be on TV because he had a really good presence about him. He's really well spoken. Obviously, that doesn't make you a great quarterback, but I just felt like I just liked his demeanor. So I did kind of become a fan of him in that sense. But I think the gap between Jefferson and Levis is pretty significant too, just because Levis does need to take care of the ball better.
Levis was really feast or famine last year, and he could improve upon that and be the guy that Kentucky really needs.
That's a new offensive coordinator at Kentucky this year too.
Yeah,
so
which that can make a huge difference. But I you just look at the product on the field. I'm taking KJ Jefferson over Levis in that situation. And I almost at that 5 spot. That's where I bring in Stetson Bennett. I think there's a lot of people thinking about Rattler at that 5 spot, but you got to show me more than he's shown. He is just nothing but hype at this point. Like he got replaced by a true freshman at Oklahoma because he was stinking it up. And I have no faith in Shane Beamer just looking, I don't know how you watch what he ran on offense last year and just go like, yep, that's a plug and play system. Put that guy in there. He's going to be great. Like, everybody can say that about Josh Heupel. That's obvious. You almost put any quarterback back there, they're going to look halfway competent. I don't see that with Beamer's offense. And maybe Rattler could, just a change of scenery changes everything for him. But I got to have more evidence. So I think it's more between Levis and Bennett at that spot. And because it's pretty uninspiring beyond that point, because you have Anthony Richardson in Florida. Again, kind of like Rattler, just unknown, hasn't done much.
Whoever wins the job at Ole Miss, that would be something interesting to watch, because Lane Kiffin does develop quarterbacks well, and they typically play better under him. He did it with Jonathan Crompton at Tennessee. He's done it all through his career. So if it's Jackson Dart, Luke Altmaier, I don't know who wins that job, but whoever wins that job, I think, they could get in that conversation possibly.
I mean, Haynes King at Texas A&M is a 5-star, but he's again going up against Max Johnson.
Yeah, from LSU, and he was he had some success at LSU. He was kind of going to be their guy there for a little bit.
Yeah, and LSU has like 14 different guys going for their.
Yeah, one of them I've said before. I think pretty sure one of those guys is going to transfer. I don't know who, but there's no way. Of course, they'll have to leave the SEC at this point, depending on who it is. But yeah, there's. And that's another one too. Who starts at LSU? Because they have talent down there. If it's Miles Brennan, like that guy has flashed before in early 2020. He was on like a Joe Burrow like pace in early 2020 before I think he had like an abdomen injury in like the third or fourth game of the year that put him down for the rest of the year, and that's when Max Johnson had to play. But that's a guy that I think people are forgetting about, where if he wins that job, he could have some real success down there. They got some talented wide receivers.
You never know. There will be one of these guys will come out of the woodwork and be a total surprise. And I think the most obvious candidate for that is Mike Wright at Vanderbilt.
That's another guy I like too. I mean, when they talk to him,
guy,
what?
Mike Wright at Vanderbilt.
I like him as a person.
As like a person, okay.
Yeah.
Like, have we even seen that guy play? I don't think we have.
No, I don't know enough about his on-field skills to have any sort of opinion on what he will do. And in that offense, probably won't do much at all. But as a person, when he's talking about some of the Manning Camp Academy stuff and his relationship with Hendon Hooker and some of those guys, like he's a real personal guy. I mean, a lot of these guys are, outside of Spencer Rattler. They're all pretty likable guys.
Yeah. Yes, Wright. In 10 appearances last year, I assume in just like snoozer games or games where Vandy was getting blown out, he completed 53.1% of his passes for 1,042 yards, 8 touchdowns to 6 interceptions. Oof.
I'd put Stetson Bennett above him.
Yes, I think we can definitively say that Stetson Bennett is better than the guy at Vandy. That is without question. So there you go. There's our top 5. Hopefully the guy that is the breakout star this season is
do we even know who the quarterback is at Missouri?
I was at the list that I was looking at said it is Brady Cook, because the guy that they had transferred, Basilak.
Yes, I do recall that guy.
Yeah, because he showed some potential.
Yeah.
And then he's gone. It says starting in the Armed Forces Bowl, over 5 appearances in 2021, Cook completed 79% of his pass attempts for 345 yards and 2 touchdowns.
That's one game. That's one game's worth.
Yeah. So a little bit of a weird sample there for Cook. I mean, who knows? Maybe he's the breakout there with the old Drinkowitz, the dork Drinkowitz at Missouri. I think that's it. Another week down, and hopefully practice continues. No injuries, good vibes, everyone. Keep it safe. No getting arrested. No nothing. Nice and quiet. Off season. We're almost there. 3 weeks. Get me there. What do we say? 19 days till the first game, and then beyond that, I think another 7 until Tennessee's first, I think, or. No, it'd be like 5 days after that.
Yeah, it's Thursday.
Like 24, 25 days till Tennessee's game. Let's just get there.
Yeah, we need to
Zach,
quit doing math. We're not doing too hot on that right this second.
Yeah. I don't do the show because I'm good at math. That is not my skill set. Charlie Burris, that's Zach Ragan. Thanks so much for listening to another edition of the A to Z Sports Big Orange podcast. And thanks again to Superbook Sports supporting the show. Coming through. Go download it. App Store, on Apple, Google Play. Get it. Bet on the games. They'll match your first bet up to $1,000. It's huge. I think that's it. Go to A2ZSports.com. Check out everything that Zach and I write. A to Z Sports Podcast Network feed on iTunes, Spotify, and YouTube.com. Subscribe to A to Z Sports to see Zach and I in video form. That's it. Thanks so much again for listening, and we'll talk to y'all next week.
See you guys later.